So welcome viewers to the series. My name is Tony Sjodin and I'm a member of the class of 2023 at Middlebury College. And I would like to introduce this episode's guest speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Newhouse. I am the research lead at the Center on Terrorism, Extremism and Counterterrorism at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. I am also an alum of Middlebury College, class of 2017, and an alum of the Middlebury Institute, graduated in December 2018 from there.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so this series explores a number of different professional areas involved in these new frontiers of technology. So could you start out by just telling us a little bit about your organization, where it fits in with the technology field, and what the current and future landscape looks like?
Sure. Yeah. So CTEC, the Center on Terrorism, Extremism and Counterterrorism, is a pretty new research center at MIIS. It is the sort of younger sibling of the Center for Nonproliferation Studies. We were created in the fall of 2018, specifically to do bleeding edge research on extremism and terrorism related issues. I've been working for the center in one capacity or another since the fall of 2018. And I have a particular interest and specialization in the intersection of extremism and terrorism with the internet and technology. I'm a data analyst by both self-training mostly, but also a little bit of formal education as well. So I am particularly interested with the ways that, extremism and terrorism studies professionals can actually use, large-scale data collection and analysis and technology to understand, track, analyze, and hopefully prevent terrorism and extremism. Because CTEC is based in Monterey, we are extremely close to Silicon Valley, and so we have pretty close relationships with a variety of tech companies up in Silicon Valley. We have had a partnership with OpenAI, which is a artificial intelligence research company based out of San Francisco. We've helped them do threat modeling on their artificial intelligence work. We also have partnerships with other tech companies to do social media investigations. So CTEC really fits in, and we've tried to position ourselves in such a way that we fit in with the burgeoning field of counterterrorism and counter-extremism work in Silicon Valley and tech and the tech industry more broadly. What a lot of people in the public haven't realized yet is that companies like Google and Facebook have dedicated counterterrorism and counter-extremism teams. Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, et cetera, all of these mainstream platforms now are hotbeds of extremist and terrorist activity, whether that's explicit or implicit. And so because they have become so vital in the organization and development of extremism and terrorism, those companies need help. They need people who understand how to speak to the technology side and also how to help them track and manage the extremist activity on their platforms. So in that way, I think CTEC really fits in this sort of hybrid role of, being able to both talk to tech and talk to data analysis and, computer science and that sort of thing. But also we have, we bring to bear the full expertise of Middlebury more broadly, especially in the policy realm and the foreign language international relations realm as well.
So could you describe a little bit of like what it is that you track online and how you do that?
Yeah, so we track basically everything in the broad subject areas of terrorism and extremism on the internet. What that would include is things like, Islamist, radical jihadist terrorism, things like, especially these days, we do a lot of work on the far right, both in the United States, but also worldwide. I have a particular specialization in far right extremism as well. So most of the work we do these days is dedicated to understanding the far right and the various strains within that. So for example, we track white supremacists, we track radical anti-state, right-wing extremists like the Boogaloo movement. We track conspiracy theories like QAnon. So all of the different sort of, ideologies and belief systems that are sort of included in the huge umbrella of far right extremism, we track those, and we use a variety of different tools to do that. I'm sure we'll talk about that more later on in this conversation, but we do everything from tracking these groups on mainstream platforms like Twitter, like I mentioned before, and then we also train our graduate students who work with us to actually do dark web investigations as well.
All right. So you started to touch on this already, but why is this work so important right now, and how is it used by different entities around the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I feel like you look at the news any day of the week and you see why this work is so important at the moment. But to put it more specifically, the internet has become a sort of force multiplier in the development of extremism, and it has given extremists and terrorists the capacity to organize across national boundaries and across cultures in a way that they've never had been able to before the advent of the internet. So when we track these things, we have an eye towards that. We have an eye towards seeing how they, like we, for example, to give a specific example, we look at radical white supremacist revolutionaries on Telegram, for instance. One of the things we keep an eye out for is the ways that they repackage and spread propaganda from Ukraine, from Russia, all of these sort of like, overlapping cultures that intersect on these platforms. So that is one of the most important, reasons why we need to do this. The other thing is the internet is mobilizing people to actually take action in the real world. If you look at, like, for example, the riots on January 6th and the storming of the Capitol building, the people who were involved in that were representative of a wide variety of different belief systems that all sort of either got created on or had audiences built up substantially on the internet. That includes the Proud Boys, QAnon, 3%ers, even some of those hardcore white supremacist revolutionaries, like I mentioned before.
So could you talk a little bit about sort of what the biggest challenges you face in this area are?
Sure. Yeah, I would say one of the biggest challenges is just that there's so much data out there. There's just so much happening at any one time that it is really difficult, especially for a small research center like ours, to keep a handle on all of it. I at times during monitoring, I'll have like 12 different windows open with like 6 different platforms, and it is incredibly difficult for any one person to actually see the entire scope of what's happening. And as a result of that, it's even harder to do things like zero in on a specific individual or specific group to track how they are doing things, because for the most part, these things are extremely transient, and the lines between like the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo movement are really blurry. So it is hard to keep tabs on what they're doing. The second thing that makes this really challenging is that one of the sort of unique parts about internet extremism, online extremism, is that it is just focused and dependent on these shared identity markers, this shared in-group language that is so impenetrable to people who are outside of that community. So it takes hours upon hours for us to just get up to the level of knowledge where we understand the weird pieces of slang and the weird memes and references that these groups are using, to the point that we can actually, say definitively, like, this is a Proud Boy group, this is a white supremacist revolutionary group, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we get, a handle on one meme or one set of slang, there's another, set coming down the pipe. It's constantly evolving. There's this arms race between us trying to understand them, and they, the extremist and terrorist community is actually continually developing that shared identity. So it's definitely challenging. And then the other challenge I'll say too is that, we come from, like, the Middlebury Institute is a policy school and a language school. There isn't a ton of robust data analysis and technical expertise just yet there. There's definitely working on it, and there are a lot of extremely passionate students and professors there who are trying to improve that. But in the modern day, in the day that we live in right now, it is incredibly imperative for people who do this kind of work to have digital and technical literacy, to be able to take, to do a baseline level of, like, how do you collect data from Twitter and turn it into actionable insight, that sort of thing. It takes a lot of work to learn that sort of thing, but it is really essential to doing this sort of job, and to being able to interact with the tech companies or the journalistic entities that we talk with.
And sort of building off of that, what would you say is the most interesting thing about the field?
The interesting thing is one of the challenges, which is actually just, this is constantly changing. It is really a fascinating challenge to have to keep up with how language is evolving and how extremists and terrorists are using language for a variety of different means, or a variety of different goals. for example, like one of those goals is just that creation of the shared identity, like I mentioned before. Another one of those goals is they are also in an arms race with tech platforms to avoid getting kicked off. So extremist groups like the Proud Boys, for instance, or various other, like QAnon especially does this a lot, is they'll actually purposefully generate sort of orthographic weirdness and unique spellings, unique slang, and that sort of thing, specifically to get around content moderators and to avoid the attention of the platform. So there will be these like long chains of like this word refers to this word, which refers to this word, which like 10 years ago actually meant some sort of anti-Semitic slur, right? So you have these like long chains of things that you have to constantly be going and doing research on to understand. But it's really fascinating too. It's like a linguist's, you know, dream to follow this sort of thing and to see how, you know, these groups will purposely and intentionally play with language, both to create that unified identity, but also to as a strategy, as a strategic action to keep themselves alive.
So talking more broadly about sort of what your day-to-day life looks like, who would you say you interact with most in sort of the work that you do, whether that be sort of the outside entities that you were talking about, like Facebook, Google, coworkers in non-tech roles, anything like that?
We always have a good number of both undergrads and graduate students working with us. And so a lot of my job is actually mentoring those students and making sure that they are able to do the sort of data analysis work that we require of them. They understand how the the linguistic study works, that sort of thing. After that, we do a lot of collaboration closely with our private industry partners, our tech partners. Some of whom I can't talk about specifically, but we have very close relationships with them because of the way that things in this field are moving. Things change so fast that we have to constantly have open avenues of dialogue with them. And then after that, we have really close relationships with professors at both the Middlebury Institute and Middlebury College. We do a lot of work in collaboration with them on a variety of different topics. And having been a Middlebury student only 4 years ago myself, I still have close friendships with a lot of them as well. And then finally, we are talking with journalists constantly, especially lately because of current events. We have positioned CTEC as trying to be a force for helping the public understand what's going on and to put things into context. And so as a result of that, we talk with journalists a lot about the different issues that we're tracking.
What would you say is like a normal daily experience for you at work?
Let's see. So my days involve a couple hours each day of just monitoring social media. So I will have Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, and then a variety of different open source intelligence tools up on my computer, just monitoring stuff. And part of that is literally just watching tweets and stuff go by from accounts that I know are suspect. Some of it will also be like actually doing sort of data analysis work, collecting data and turning it into something. Like I'll do, for example, like maybe once or twice a week, I'll actually build networks, social network visualizations out of the data that I collect to try to understand better how like a certain hashtag is trending on Twitter or a certain link is being shared on Facebook, that sort of thing. So social media monitoring, especially for my current role at CTEC, is incredibly essential and is something I do every single day. And it is also essential, having talked with people who've worked in the sort of my, the equivalent of my position at tech companies and that sort of thing. Social media monitoring is a daily sort of task for everyone in this field, regardless of where you work.
All right, great. And what would you say the future of your field looks like, whether that be new and evolving technologies or new challenges that you're anticipating?
Yeah, I think I hinted at this in a previous answer, but I think where this field is going is it's going to require everyone who is an extremism studies person or extremism researcher or a counter extremism professional to have a pretty good proficiency in data analysis and coding. It really is important to be able to do this sort of thing yourself. And I think we're sort of beyond the time where counterterrorism, counter extremism professionals could get away with only doing qualitative work. At some places, like, at big companies, people have data science teams doing a lot of the work for them. But even then, it's important to understand what those data scientists are doing. And so I think over time, we're going to see more and more extremism researchers and start to become data scientists and data analysts themselves. And sort of a adjacent to that, a sort of corresponding trend I think is going to happen too, is we're going to see a lot more integration of emerging technologies in this field. So like, counter extremism professionals are still really early on in incorporating things like machine learning and artificial intelligence into their work. We are going to get to the point where I think that'll be essential to what we do, even at a small center like ours. And we've already started dabbling in that sort of thing. We've already started trying to set up things like, deep learning models that detect extremist content in the data that we collect, but it's still in the really early stages. But I think over time, that'll become more and more vital.
So at Middlebury, you majored in political science and English, is that correct?
Yes. Yep. I got a joint major in political science and English, which was a fun and weird experience itself.
Yeah, so tell us sort of where you went from there.
Yeah, so I have a pretty weird path to where I am now. When I was at Middlebury College, I actually interned all 3 summers at GameSpot, which is a video game website, and then freelanced for them a little bit after I graduated as well. So I sort of got my professional start actually as a journalist writing about video games. But that actually had an impact on me. I was working there during Gamergate, which was this pretty big event in the video game industry that sort of spilled over into mainstream news and mainstream public, where a group of aggrieved, primarily white men who were video games fans, on a series of trumped up charges, decided to start coordinating harassment campaigns against women developers and women journalists. And some of my good friends at that were actually caught in the crossfire there and received a lot of harassment as a result of Gamergate. Gamergate also produced a number of pretty significant far-right influencers who would go on to affect the landscape of far-right extremism, including people like Milo Yiannopoulos, who, definitely he got us started Gamergate and then went on to be a huge Breitbart contributor and then eventually just a right-wing provocateur. So that's a long story to essentially say that my experience in the video game industry actually sort of sparked my interest in far-right extremism, weirdly enough. And so after I graduated from Middlebury, I knew that I also wanted to learn more about the tech industry as well. And so with my interest in political science, interest in tech, and then this burgeoning interest in like extremism and terrorism, I first interned at Uber on their physical security team and did work on their crisis management team, which essentially was helping them manage their response to disasters, including disasters like terrorism and extremism. So I was there and helping their response to, for example, the Las Vegas shooting in the fall of 2017. After that, I started at MIIS, where I focused primarily on learning more about far-right extremism. And with that interest in tech and desire to work in tech, I also started teaching myself how to code. I spent my entire time at MIIS trying to, use those and develop those data analysis skills wherever I could. During that summer, between my 2 semesters at MIIS, I worked at PlayStation on their global fraud management team. So I did a little bit of a stint in financial crimes. And then after that, so my fall semester at MIIS, I had the opportunity to start working with Jason Blazakis, who was just hired that semester to actually start CTEC. And I talked to them, and we were just chatting about places that we could go and projects that we could do. And I suggested a project that ended up becoming one of our big projects with a private company that we can't talk about. But it was sort of a right place, right time thing. But I had really deliberately attempted to, focus all of my attention on technology, data analysis, and how those things interact with terrorism and extremism. After that, after I graduated at MIIS, I spent a year working at PlayStation again on their data governance team, which was specializing in privacy, like data privacy. I was also contracting for CTEC at the time too, so I was still working on CTEC projects, but my full-time job was doing data privacy stuff, which is actually really, it was like a really excellent experience. And I recommend everyone, especially if you're interested in tech, read up on privacy, because privacy law is really fascinating. And there's a weird, there are some interesting trade-offs between like enforcing privacy at the social media level and also doing counter extremism and counterterrorism work. Because if you have to protect people's privacy and you can't give people, if you can't give external researchers data, you're going to lose some insight into how extremists are using your platform. And then after that, finally, I came back full-time at CTEC. So I've been here about a year full-time. So overall, it's a super weird and sort of, winding path, but the guiding light through it was this interest in the intersection of tech and security. And I was deliberately trying to build my skills in that way.
All right, great. So what would you say was sort of most important to you in getting your first job, and sort of what led you to your first job at CTEC eventually?
So the most important part about the most important thing I had going for me when I started working for CTEC originally was that interest in data analysis. I seriously, like, I know I've been hitting this a lot, I've been emphasizing this a lot, but seriously, even getting a baseline understanding of like, how do you get data from Twitter into Python? How do you make a visualization? That sort of thing. Like really stuff that you could learn in a few hours, even if you come to it not knowing any coding at all. Those things will give you a massive leg up and will just open doors for you throughout the industry, throughout the tech industry, and throughout the sort of extremism research industry more broadly. So having that interest meant that I could go to Jason Bouzakis and say, hey, like, I'm willing to build this prototype of this tech platform, this data analysis platform for this project. Would you be interested in me doing that? And he said yes. And then I was able to, do that and sort of keep involved with CTEC as it grew. I'll also say that going back even further before CTEC existed, I got the job at Uber and the job at PlayStation because I had such a focus on writing. So during undergrad especially, so I was able to, I had a pretty decent portfolio of like political science writing and policy writing that I was able to show the potential, my potential managers at Uber and PlayStation, and say, hey, this is how I communicate. I feel like I'm decent at breaking down complex issues and communicating them to the wider public. And having that focus on that specific thing is really, really important for getting a job, even especially in tech, where breaking down complex issues and communicating it to the public is one of the things that almost everyone has to do at some point. And again, it'll give you a leg up. There isn't a ton of people. One of Middlebury's greatest strengths is teaching their students how to do that, how to do that exactly. And if you're coming out of Middlebury, if you're coming out of a school, similar to Middlebury, it is totally worthwhile to play that up to potential managers and say, hey, like I come from Middlebury and my entire, education was based on this, incredible focus on written communication and verbal communication. So I have that skill set that is necessary at every tech job.
You've already touched a little bit on this from your education, but what would you say the role of advanced degrees are in your field? How necessary are they? How common are they? And what's the advantage or disadvantage to pursuing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think extremism studies and sort of the intersection of it and technology is a pretty niche field, and there aren't a ton of people. It's also extremely specialized. So the role of, my getting a MA in non-proliferation and terrorism studies was to give me that additional specialized knowledge. I've said before that like Middlebury and MIIS work together really nicely because Middlebury gives you this breadth of knowledge, this like foundation and communication and like policy knowledge if you take political science, that really helps you launch off into what MIIS teaches you, which is it gives you that really that incredible depth of knowledge. You can take extremely specialized classes at MIIS on things like far-right terrorism or terrorism financing or network analysis, all these sorts of extremely specialized classes that give you that additional expertise necessary to go into the workforce. I don't like, it's not 100% essential. You can teach yourself a lot of that stuff, especially if you know you know, like if you're an undergrad at Middlebury and you know that you want to do terrorism and extremism work, you can do a lot of specialization there already. But the opportunities that MIIS presented me to specialize, and also beyond that, to work with professors outside of class on those specialized areas of knowledge, were unique to my education. So I think that was the biggest advantage that I got from my master's program, was having those opportunities to learn and apply specialized knowledge in the sorts of work that I would be doing after graduation.
All right. And you also already touched a little bit on this, but sort of, was your career path typical of how you end up where you are? What would you say is a typical or atypical way to get to working within terrorism studies and technology?
I think getting a master's in something like security studies or terrorism studies is pretty typical. The things I would say are not typical are, like, I didn't have a think tank internship. I didn't work in government. I didn't work, in law enforcement adjacent stuff. Like I said, I worked in video game journalism, and then at Uber in something that's adjacent to but not equivalent to terrorism studies. So it was definitely weird, but I think that weirdness gave me the knowledge of the tech industry that became a huge advantage in my work at CTEC, because I was able to better talk with tech representatives and make those connections that ended up becoming partnerships. I'll say that there's a lot of new extremism employees or new extremism researchers who are coming into the field are coming from more hard sciences. There's a growing number of people coming from pure data science masters. I myself I'm getting a data science master's right now, just to have that additional sort of formal education there. There's a lot of that too. And I'll say I think the field is stronger for it. The traditional path of going from political science and undergrad to security studies and masters with, internships along the way at the Brookings Institute or, whatever other think tank, are really, like, that's a great path. And I think it's a solid path, and you'll have plenty of opportunities if you go that path. But if you are, or, someone who's in the hard sciences who wants to do this, like, there are tons of opportunities for you as well. I think, like I said before, there's going to be a growing need for hybrid professionals who can do both the, data science, computer science stuff, and speak to the specialized niche knowledge of extremism studies.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. Lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what advice you have for current students on how best to prepare themselves for entry into this career or similar ones.
But the best advice I ever had is, if you have a narrow interest and you have, let's say, even like a project in mind, having something to work towards, it makes it so much easier to develop those skills than just, say, like watching Codecademy tutorials for hours on end. You just won't get the same level of understanding out of that as you will if you have that sort of narrow focus and that idea of a project to work towards. So I think those are my big pieces of advice. The other pieces of advice are, don't be afraid to reach out to people at a job that you're interested in. I get students from Middlebury and MIIS and other schools reaching out to me, and I love talking about what I do. People love talking about it. They love talking about themselves in particular. So one of the best pieces of advice is ask people just what their experiences are and what they like about their jobs, and see if they'll hop on a Zoom call with you. And it doesn't have to be like, I wouldn't suggest explicitly asking for a job, but simply opening those avenues of communication and just asking people about themselves will lead to job opportunities almost certainly. Like, all of my jobs were essentially a result of that, of just asking people what they do.
For you, thank you once again for working with us and helping prepare students for their first career explorations. In closing, I also want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of people in a broad variety of organizations in our other episodes in the series. And I also want to encourage you to watch the other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the events and programs tab on the CCI website. Thank you again for watching.